Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Tom Ridgway, and I have spent most of my 47 years walking these mountains, breathing in their secrets and false silences. I've been a ranger since Nixon took office, long enough to know that the woods keep their own kind of order, and most ghost stories are nothing but wind and old fears. My grandfather patrolled these ridges before highways sliced through them. My father did too, until his heart quit on a cold morning. I do it because I don't know how to live anywhere else. At least, that's what I tell myself. Standing at the edge of Dark Hollow, with the trees burning red and gold in the October sun, I try to remember when it all started feeling wrong. It was the middle of an unseasonably warm autumn. Dry as bones, the leaves crackling like old parchment, the air sharp with the promise of winter. I was stationed in the Dark Hollow Falls sector of Shenandoah National Park, 20 miles from Skyline Drive. No easy rescue if trouble hit, and lately the radios were acting up, static, eating every word. Makes a man feel cut off, more isolated than usual in a place carved out for solitude. Between patrols, I jot down cave system maps and polish old musket balls from Civil War dig sites. I work rescue operations when needed. Know how to read limestone chimneys for weak patches, rope anchors to dying hemlocks, spot a backflowing stream before someone gets trapped by a flash flood. That kind of knowledge keeps you alive, keeps you from believing nonsense about haints in the holler. But the silence lately felt like a warning. Birds vanished 2 weeks ago. Then the chipmunks, not so much as a mosquito whine after dusk. The only sounds, wind hissing through dead chestnut stumps, the faint crack and shuffle of falling leaves, and, inside the caves, the sucking drip of water nobody else seemed to hear. The drought pressed everything flat. Kudzu crept entangled, ropes over the ranger shed. Even the shadows leaned the wrong way sometimes, stretching uphill along ground that should have swallowed them. I was not alone for long. My daughter Jenny arrived with a battered suitcase and a court order, glaring at me from under her tangled hair. 16. Angry. The spitting image of her mother. Gone now, except for the papers she keeps mailing to the ranger station. I hadn't seen Jenny in almost a year. We stood 6 feet apart and traded short answers about school, music, the weather, anything but the reasons we were really here. I tried to warm things up, taking her to the overlook above the falls, pointing out the view, talking about rare fern species and historic cave sites. She barely looked. Maybe she sensed what was different in the air, a taste like pennies, the humid breath of something not quite alive. The next day, a team of historians from the University of Virginia signed in, led by Dr. Martha Vance. They brought fresh boots and expensive cameras, talking quick about primary research and temporal anomalies in battlefields. I played tour guide as usual, collecting their release forms and checking their gear. Lanterns, compasses, spare radio. Everything looked proper, except my radio still spat static. And Dr. Vance's watch kept skipping 3 minutes forward in the dark. They wanted to see the massacre site, the so-called hollows, where in 1862, 23 Confederate deserters were killed by their own for trying to leave. No one had ever found their true graves, only rumors buried under the moss and dirt. Locals still mark the old evacuation story, whispering about families forced out to make way for the great park. Old wounds, I suppose, never really close. I didn't tell the researchers about my grandfather fighting for the losing side, nor about the silence in the woods lately. Let them think I was just another Rorschach, anger with a name that fit the hills. But later that day, as Jenny wandered the old battle ridge, I caught her staring into the trees, her lips moving. When I got close enough to hear, she whispered, "Did you hear that?" I hadn't heard a thing. 3 mornings after their arrival, I found Dr. Vance and her 2 grad students, Rick Palmer and Amy Foster, waiting at the station, shifting nervously. They carried gloves and notebooks, their faces pale and drawn. Something in the air pressed flat against my skin as I led them up the ridge. The route to the site snaked through dying hemlock groves, past ancient chestnut stumps, across the mouth of a cave I'd sealed off last spring. "No birds here, not for days," Rick muttered, scanning the canopy with wide eyes. I brushed off his worry. Drought, maybe, or the kudzu choking the food sources. But the woods kept pulling at me in ways I couldn't explain. As we reached an old oak, Amy called out, her voice high and sharp. A musket ball poked from a fresh scar in the bark, half sunk into wood that couldn't have been more than 30 years old. "Impossible," she said, digging at it with shaking fingers. "This tree shouldn't even be old enough." Dr. Vance hushed her, holding up a bayonet crusted red with something wet and gleaming. Blood. I pretended it was rust, because anything else made no sense. But Jenny, trailing behind and uncharacteristically quiet, trembled. She stared into the tangled undergrowth, her voice a cracked whisper. "Dad, there are men out there." Her eyes were wild, like she was seeing something we couldn't. I shivered, told her it was just nerves and history catching up. But inside I wondered about those old stories, about things that hang on to certain bloodlines. As we moved deeper, equipment started to break down. Cameras refused to work, lens fogged by a chill blowing in from nowhere. Compasses spun, the needles dancing and tick-ticking in lazy circles. My own radio caught only jumbled fragments. "Should have left. Det. Run." Before silence snapped shut again. At the edge of the main meadow, Gran, Nye Whitman, an old-timer who still wandered the hills, came stumping out of the brush. She wouldn't come near the group, but waved bony fingers at Jenny and spat into the leaves. "You pay the mountain's debt, Ridgway. Don't tarry after dark." The words landed heavy. Dr. Vance shook her head and opened her notebook, dismissing local talk, but Amy went pale, clutching her coat like she was holding herself together. That afternoon, as shadows twisted long across the ground, Rick found a nest of musket balls and bayonets under a hickory root, each caked with grime but shining like they'd been buried that morning. Amy knelt down, her hands shaking, and picked up a jacket button with a Confederate star pressed deep. She dropped it with a gasp, skin blistering where it touched her palm. By the time dusk bled into the trees, Jenny's stories changed. No longer just men, but gray soldiers, drifting silent and angry among the trunks. For the first time in years, I wished my grandfather could tell me what he saw the night the blood ran in these hills. The woods pressed closer with every step. We spent the night at the ranger outpost, a low wood-slat cabin clinging to the edge of the dark, the cave mouth gaping like a second shadow. Jenny slept light, jerking awake with gasps, one hand pressed to her chest. I lay in the next cot, pretending not to hear when she wept. The woods were deathly still by midnight, the air so thin it tasted metallic. Then, just before dawn, I woke to boots echoing on leaves outside. Not a single set. Dozens, in perfect time. I slipped outside and saw shapes moving against the morning fog. Soldiers, gray coats brushed with dew, faces strange and blurred, marching the edge of the old massacre trail. I blinked hard, shook my head, looked again. They were gone. In their place, only cold, shivering air and a cluster of black crows, silent and watching. When I told the team, Dr. Vance frowned, blaming stress and too much local legend. By breakfast, their skepticism cracked. Rick kept mumbling Civil War names, lost in half-remembered stories, fingers trembling as he cleaned a lantern. Amy shivered, clinging to her coat. Dr. Vance fiddled with the map, marking places where history seemed thin. The next trek led us to an old sinkhole, supposedly mapped out in the 1930s. Inside, the air dropped from muggy to frigid in a breath. Shadows ran uphill on the walls. Cameras froze again, batteries dead. At the far end, a tangled mess of rusted rifle parts jutted from the rock, fresh blood pooling beneath them. Impossible. It had to be a trick of the light. I told myself as much. Dr. Vance knelt to examine a bayonet. Her voice thinned out, words slurring. They sent boys to die here, she murmured, voice rough and strange. Hidden shame in the dirt. Always the Ridgway name. Always the debt. Her eyes rolled, and for a moment she spoke in an old, crackling voice, not hers. She recited names, dates, curses I'd only ever heard from my grandfather's lips. Amy screamed. Rick darted for the tunnel entrance, flashlight beam bouncing. The light flickered and died. Rick's voice turned into a shriek, cut off sharp. We found him moments later, crumpled against the wall, a fresh bayonet wound gaping in his side. Blood bubbled from his lips. His last words, "Ezra's men. They're here." Amy fell to her knees, sobbing, clutching Rick's old keffiyeh to her face. She started babbling about being a widow, about soldiers lost and waiting. Said she could hear cannons, taste gunpowder in her mouth. Her eyes never focused again. Jenny fell silent, staring at the button burn on her hand. I pressed cold water against the wound, tried to keep her calm. She wouldn't look at me. "You knew, Dad. Your blood called them." Granny Whitman's words rang out in my mind. The mountain keeps its debts. Dr. Vance staggered up, her voice flickering from her own to something ancient and angry. She pointed at me. "Union men, traitors to blood. It's your shame. Ridgway. Fix it, or we all stay." Outside, the sky boiled with strange light. Insects, newly returned, swarmed the path back. My radio, for the first time in days, crackled, "Debt. Down in the dark. Pay what's owed." Shadows thickened at the edge of camp. I saw faces, young, terrified, half stuck between bone and smoke, moving closer. The woods held no life but them now. I gathered my gear, rope, chalk, an old family Bible I hadn't opened in years. Jenny watched, her eyes far away. The only answer left was down, into the caves where my ancestors fought and hid, where secrets gnawed at the limestone for a century and more. I tied ropes to the last standing hemlock and made Jenny swear to hold tight. Amy, lost in her own war-torn past, whispered prayers into the dark. Dr. Vance, face pale as wax, led the way, her voice shifting through old dialects and curses. Inside, the cold squeezed my breath. Shadows rushed along the walls, following us. At the bottom, the air turned thick and heavy. Candles flickered, and I smelled blood. We reached the original massacre site, a hidden limestone chamber, rough burial mounds rising like broken teeth from the damp floor. The sound of marching boots rattled the stone around us. The air twisted, shimmering, and the ghosts came. Colonel Ezra Hawthorne stepped from the dark, his coat dirt-streaked, his eyes blazing hate. The debt never paid, Ridgway. Blood calls to blood. Soldiers ringed us in a tightening circle. Jenny clutched my arm, but then went stiff, her gaze glassy. She spoke in another's voice, soft, cracked, and full of hurt. "My husband waits. You took him. Give him peace, or give him war." I reached for my daughter, tears stinging my eyes, but she jerked away, staring at me with eyes that weren't hers. The ghosts pressed closer, cannon fire booming inside my skull, the stink of fear and gunpowder thick in the air. My hands shook as I fumbled for the Bible. I opened it to the old family pages, tracing my bloodline back, reading aloud every hidden shame, every lie. The mountain echoed with their cries. The only way through was truth. I kneeled on the dirt, hands up, voice cracking. "My grandfather gave you up. My father lied about your graves. We hid your shame, buried you twice. I ask your forgiveness. Accept our peace." I scattered dirt and leaves atop each burial mound, repeating their names until my voice gave out. For a moment the world warped, gray coats dissolving into smoke, cannon blasts fading to distant thunder. Jenny slumped to the cave floor, clutching her burned hand, sobbing heavy and wild. Colonel Hawthorne watched, his eyes bitter, but he raised his hand in a final salute. "Some things can't be undone, Ridgway. We'll wait. Blood remembers." The cave went black as the ghosts faded. When I woke, dawn burned cold and sharp against the mouth of the cave. Jenny sat beside me, staring into the morning. A pale streak lit her hair, silver where it should have been brown. Her eyes, wiser now, a little haunted, met mine. "I hear them, Dad. Even now. I always will." She said it soft, sad, but sure. I tried to reach for her hand. She pulled away, gently, like she knew she didn't belong here anymore. Back at the station, Amy muttered Civil War prayers in her sleep. Dr. Vance, voice no longer her own, scribbled names and places that made no sense. The Park Service chalked it all up to a gas leak, closed half the ridge for repairs. I signed my retirement forms that week. Jenny's mother called, voice stiff, to say she'd take her back, make sure she saw a doctor. I watched the Blue Ridge settle back into silence. Birds slow to return. The hemlocks standing watchful and thin. A final letter arrived from Granny Whitman. Some debts passed down through blood, and mountains never forget. I left the badge and rifle at the office, packed up my father's journals, and stood one last time at the overlook where the sun cut through the fog. Jenny's laughter echoed in my mind, replaced now with voices calling names I'll never forget. If you ask me today what happened up in those hollows, I'll tell you it was just an old ranger story. Something about history too heavy to carry, shame too deep to bury. But I still taste iron in the dawn air. I still count my steps around the old massacre trail. Somewhere beneath limestone and pine, the dead are patient. And in these mountains, not even time can make the past let go. My name is Catherine Morrison, but everyone calls me Kate. I'm a park ranger with the National Park Service, and I've been working these West Virginia mountains for 11 years now. People think being a ranger is all about helping lost hikers and putting out campfires. But my specialty is something most folks never think about: hazardous materials and abandoned mine safety. I grew up in these mountains. My daddy was a coal miner until a cave-in took him when I was 12. After that, Mama married a man from Charleston and tried to get me away from the coal dust and danger. But these mountains called me back. I guess I wanted to understand what killed my father, and maybe help make sure it didn't happen to other families. It was March of 1986 when this all started. The whole world was talking about that nuclear disaster in Russia, Chernobyl. People were scared about radiation and contamination, and suddenly everyone cared about environmental damage. That's when my supervisor handed me a special assignment from the EPA. They wanted a complete hazard assessment of the abandoned Thurmond mining district in the New River Gorge. "Kate," he said, "you know these old mines better than anyone. We need someone who can document the environmental damage from a century of deep mining. The government's finally ready to take this seriously." I loaded up my truck with testing equipment: Geiger counters, pH meters, sample containers, cameras. The drive to Thurmond took me through country I knew like the back of my hand, but hadn't visited in years. The spring floods had been bad that year, and many of the old mine shafts were filling with water for the first time since they'd been abandoned. Thurmond used to be a real town: company houses, a depot, even a bank. Now it was just a few empty buildings and rusted mining equipment scattered across the hillsides. The tipples where coal was loaded onto trains stood like metal skeletons against the sky. Everything was the color of rust and ash. I set up camp in what used to be the company office building. It had good bones and a roof that mostly didn't leak. From there I could see the whole valley and the dark mouths of mine entrances dotting the hillsides like empty eye sockets. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds sang here. No insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed quieter, like the land itself was holding its breath. The streams ran orange from acid drainage, and patches of dead vegetation showed where toxic groundwater had seeped to the surface. My daddy used to tell me stories about the mines when I was little. He said the old-timers talked about strange things living deep underground. Tommy-knockers, they called them. Little spirits that would warn miners of cave-ins by tapping on the walls. "Course, Katie girl," he'd say, "that's just miner folklore. Underground monsters were just stories to explain accidents that didn't make sense." On my first day of real surveying, I found something that made me think of those old stories. Near the entrance to what the mining records called the Widowmaker shaft, there was a patch of fungus growing on the rock walls. But this wasn't ordinary fungus. It glowed with a pale blue-green light, like something from the bottom of the ocean. I'd never seen anything like it. I collected samples carefully, wearing gloves and a mask. The fungus felt warm to the touch, even through the latex. When I held my Geiger counter near it, the clicks came faster. Not dangerous levels, but definitely above background radiation. That night, alone in the old office building, I wrote in my field journal, Day 1. Bioluminescent fungal growth near Widowmaker entrance. Possible connection to radioactive contamination from underground coal seam fires. Need to investigate. T. Further. I had no idea what I was really looking at. I thought I was just documenting environmental damage. I thought the strangest things I'd find would be chemical contamination and maybe some structural instability. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. The next morning, I decided to interview some of the local people before going deeper into my investigation. There was an old miner named Jesse Hatfield who lived about 10 miles down the valley. He'd worked these mines for 40 years before they shut down, and if anyone knew their secrets, it would be him. Jesse was sitting on his porch when I drove up, whittling a piece of wood with hands that shook just slightly. He was probably in his 70s, with the pale, hollow look that a lot of old miners get from breathing coal dust their whole lives. "You're Tom Morrison's girl," he said before I even introduced myself. Got his eyes. "Sorry about what happened to him." "Thank you, Mr. Hatfield. I'm Kate Morrison with the Park Service. I'm doing a survey of the old mines, documenting environmental hazards. I was hoping you could tell me about the history of the area." Jesse's knife stopped moving through the wood. He looked at me for a long moment, then spit into the dirt beside his chair. "Environmental hazards," he repeated. "That what they're calling it now? What do you mean?" "Sit down, Kate Morrison. Let me tell you about the Widowmaker." Jesse Hatfield set down his whittling knife and looked out toward the mountains where the old mines waited in the shadows. "The Widowmaker was the deepest shaft in the whole district," he began. "Went down near 800 feet with tunnels that stretched for miles underground. The coal seam there was thick and rich, but it came with a price. More men died in that mine than all the others combined." I pulled out my notebook. "What kind of accidents?" "Started back in the 1890s, soon as they opened her up. Cave-ins, explosions, gas leaks, all the usual ways a mine can kill you. But there were other things too, strange things." Jesse's voice got quieter, and I had to lean forward to hear him. "Men would go missing. Sometimes we'd find pieces of them, sometimes nothing at all. The company bosses always blamed it on the usual hazards, but us miners knew better. There was something down there that didn't want to be disturbed." "What kind of something?" "The old-timers called it different names. Some said it was a Tommy knocker gone bad, fed too long on coal dust and poison water. Others thought it was something that came up from deeper than any man was meant to dig. But we all agreed on one thing. It was getting stronger." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Hatfield, I know mining is dangerous work, and I understand how folklore develops to explain accidents. But I'm looking for scientific data about actual environmental hazards." Jesse laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Scientific data? You sound just like those government boys who came through here in '78. They had all kinds of fancy equipment, too. Kept talking about gas readings and structural integrity." "What happened to them?" "Two of them went down into the Widowmaker to take measurements. Only one came back up. He was babbling about lights moving in the deep tunnels and sounds like breathing coming from the rock walls. The company shut the mine the next week and sealed it up tight. I felt a chill despite the warm spring air. Where's the man who came back up?" "State Hospital in Huntington. Been there ever since. Keeps drawing pictures of things with too many eyes." That afternoon, I went back to the Widowmaker entrance. The shaft opening was about 6 feet across, with an iron grate welded over it. Warning signs covered the metal framework. Danger, abandoned mine, keep out. But the spring floods had washed out the ground around the base, and I could see that the grate had shifted. There was a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I wrought my testing equipment and set it up carefully. The Geiger counter was clicking faster here than anywhere else I'd measured. Not enough to be immediately dangerous, but definitely elevated. The air coming up from the shaft carried a strange smell. Not quite sulfur, not quite ozone, but something electric and alive. I lowered my thermometer on a string down into the darkness. Instead of getting cooler as it went deeper, the temperature actually increased. At 50 feet down, it was reading 85 degrees. At 100 feet, the string went slack. Something had cut it. I pulled up what was left. The nylon cord looked like it had been dissolved by acid. That's when I heard it for the first time, a sound that came up from deep underground. It started low, almost below the range of human hearing, then rose to something that vibrated in my chest. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then faded away. I told myself it was just air moving through the tunnels, maybe heated by an underground coal seam fire. The geology of the area could create all kinds of strange acoustic effects. But every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from that hole in the ground. Instead, I did what any good ranger would do. I documented everything carefully, took photographs, and made detailed notes. Then I drove back to town to call my supervisor. The payphone outside Murphy's General Store was the only one for 20 miles. I fed it quarters and dialed the Park Service office. "Bill, it's Kate. I'm going to need some additional equipment for this survey." "What kind of equipment?" "Underwater cameras, a longer probe cable, maybe some diving gear. These mine shafts are flooded deeper than I expected." "Kate, you're not supposed to be going into those mines. This is supposed to be a surface survey only." "I know, but the EPA specifically requested data on groundwater contamination. I need to know what's down there." There was a long pause. "All right, but I'm sending a team to back you up. Dr. Robert Lynch from the EPA's Hazmat Division and his assistant Maria Vask. They'll be there tomorrow?" "I don't need backup, Bill." "It's not optional, Kate. These abandoned mining sites can be incredibly dangerous. Lynch has experience with toxic environments, and Vasquez is a geologist. They'll help you get the job done safely." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that sound from the mine shaft, low and rhythmic, like something huge breathing in the darkness below. I kept thinking about Jesse Hatfield's story and the government researcher who'd gone crazy in 1978. Around midnight, I gave up trying to sleep and went outside. The night air was cool and clean compared to the chemical smell that hung around the mine entrances. Stars filled the sky from horizon to horizon, the kind of view you only get in places far from cities and electric lights. I was looking up at the Milky Way when I noticed a strange glow coming from the direction of the Widowmaker. It was faint, barely visible, like someone had lit a candle deep underground. But as I watched, it got brighter, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. I grabbed my flashlight and camera and hiked the half-mile to the mine entrance. The glow was definitely coming from down in the shaft, and it was the same blue-green color as the fungus I'd found growing on the rocks. I set up my camera for a long exposure and pointed it down into the mine. Through the viewfinder, I could see the walls of the shaft glowing with that same bioluminescent light. And at the very edge of what the camera could capture, something moved. It was only there for a second, a glimpse of something large and dark sliding through the flooded tunnel at the bottom of the shaft. But it was enough to make my hands shake as I packed up my equipment. Whatever was down there, it was alive, and it was getting stronger. Dr. Robert Lynch and Maria Vasquez arrived the next morning in a government van load, Ed with equipment I'd never seen before. Lynch was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who kept checking his watch and adjusting his glasses. Maria was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of confident manner that comes from knowing your job inside and out. "Ranger Morrison?" Lynch extended his hand. "EPA Hazmat Division. This is Dr. Vasquez, our consulting geologist. We understand you found some unusual contamination here." I showed them my documentation from the past 2 days. The radiation readings, the temperature anomalies, the photographs of the bioluminescent fungus. Lynch studied everything carefully while Maria examined the rock samples I'd collected. "This is definitely beyond normal mining contamination," Lynch said finally. "The radiation levels suggest something more than just naturally occurring uranium in the coal seams. And this organic phosphorescence, He held up one of the fungus samples. I've never seen anything quite like it. Maria was looking at my photographs of the mine entrance. You said you saw movement down there last night? Something large moving through the flooded areas. Could have been debris shifted by water current, but you don't think so, she finished. No, I don't. Lynch was already unpacking detection equipment. Well, there's only one way to find out what we're dealing with. We'll need to go down and take direct measurements. The shaft is flooded, I warned them, and the water tested highly acidic. Plus there's some kind of structural instability that cut my probe line yesterday. That's why we brought diving suits, Maria said. The EPA has been dealing with flooded mine contamination sites for years. We know how to stay safe. I wasn't so sure about that, but I helped them set up their equipment. They had underwater cameras, sophisticated sensors, and communication systems that would let them stay in contact while exploring the flooded tunnels. By afternoon, we were ready. Lynch would go down first, with Maria monitoring from the surface. I would handle communications and document everything, with my camera. Remember, Lynch said as he checked his diving gear, we're looking for the source of the contamination. Could be leaking storage tanks, improperly disposed chemicals, maybe even some kind of illegal dumping. He squeezed through the gap in the grate and disappeared into the shaft. His voice came through the radio clearly at first. Descending past 50 feet, water is definitely acidic, but the suit's holding up fine. Temperature rising as expected from geothermal activity. Maria monitored his progress on her instruments. Looking good, Bob. Your depth gauge shows 75 feet. Roger that. I can see the main tunnel entrance now. The bioluminescence is much more pronounced down here. It's covering most of the tunnel walls. Any sign of what's causing it? Negative. It appears to be some kind of bacterial or fungal colony, but the distribution is unusual. It's arranged in patterns, almost like... The radio went silent. Bob? Maria called. Dr. Lynch, please respond. Nothing. His vital signs are still strong, she said, checking her monitors. But I'm not getting any audio. We waited 5 minutes. 10. Maria was getting more nervous by the second. I'm going down, she announced. Maybe we should call for backup first, I suggested. No time. If Bob's in trouble, every minute counts. Maria went through the same preparation routine, checking her equipment twice before entering the shaft. I watched her depth gauge as she descended, 50 feet, 75, 100. I can see Bob's lights ahead, her voice crackled through the radio. He's in the main tunnel, but he's not moving. Is he responsive? Negative. I'm approaching his position now. The bioluminescence here is incredible. It's like swimming through liquid starlight. But there's something else. The radio signal started breaking up. Maria, say again, you're cutting. Out. Something in the water with us. Moving. Oh God, it's huge. The line went dead. I stared at the monitoring equipment. Both depth gauges showed the divers were still at 100 feet, but their vital signs were erratic. Maria's heart rate had spiked to over 180 beats per minute. Then Lynch's signal disappeared entirely. I grabbed the emergency radio and tried to call for help, but we were too deep in the mountains. No signal. The nearest ranger station was 40 miles away, and my truck would take an hour to get there. Maria's vital signs were still transmitting, but they were getting weaker. Her depth gauge showed she was moving deeper into the mine. 150 feet, 200 feet, 250. That was impossible. The mine shaft was only supposed to go down 800 feet total, and most of it should have been blocked by cave-ins decades ago. But the signal kept descending. At 300 feet, Maria's vitals flatlined. I stood there alone next to that hole in the ground, staring at instruments that told me 2 people had just died in the most impossible way. Part of me wanted to run, to get in my truck and drive as far away as possible. But I was a park ranger. I had responsibilities. I also had Jesse Hatfield's words echoing in my head. There was something down there that didn't want to be disturbed. As the sun set, that blue-green glow started emanating from the mine shaft again, stronger than before. And with it came sounds. Not the single breathing noise I'd heard earlier, but multiple sounds. Scraping, sliding, and something that sounded almost like voices, but speaking no language I'd ever heard. I set up my camera for another long exposure, hoping to capture some evidence of what had happened to Lynch and Maria. Through the viewfinder, I could see the entire shaft glowing like a giant luminescent tube. And then I saw them. Bodies floating in the water, but not Lynch and Maria. These were older corpses, dozens of them, preserved by the acidic conditions. Some were wearing mining clothes from decades past. Others wore more recent gear, including what looked like government-issued equipment from the 1970s. The missing researchers Jesse had told me about weren't missing. They were still down there. But as I watched through the camera, something moved among the floating bodies. Something alive and huge, with multiple points of light that could have been eyes. It moved with purpose, arranging the corpses in careful patterns on the tunnel floor. The thing was using the dead bodies like decorations. That's when I realized the truth that Lynch and Maria had died learning. Whatever lived in the Widowmaker wasn't just some leftover mining hazard. It was intelligent. It was territorial. And it had been collecting trophies for nearly a century. I packed up my equipment as fast as I could and headed back to the office building. But I could feel something watching me the entire walk back. The mountain itself seemed to have eyes. I spent that night writing everything down, every detail, every measurement, every horrible thing I'd seen. If something happened to me, maybe someone else would find the documentation and understand what they were dealing with. But as dawn broke over the mountains, I realized I couldn't just run away. Lynch and Maria were down there, and they might still be alive. Even if they weren't, their families deserved to know what happened to them. More than that, this thing, whatever it was, had been killing people for 100 years. It had to be stopped. I loaded my truck with every piece of mining equipment I could find in the abandoned buildings. Explosives left over from the last blasting operations, cables and winches, emergency oxygen tanks. If I was going down into that mine, I was going prepared. Jesse Hatfield was waiting for me when I got back to the Widowmaker. "Figured you might come back," he said. "Saw the government van leave empty this morning. They're dead, aren't they?" "Probably. Just like all the others." Jesse spit into the dirt. "You planning to go down there after them?" "I have to try." "No, you don't. You can walk away, call in the army, let them deal with it." "And how many more people die while we're waiting for the military to believe this is real?" Jesse studied my face for a long moment. "You got your daddy's stubborn streak. All right, if you're determined to do this fool thing, let me tell you what you're really facing." He sat down on a broken piece of mining equipment and pulled out his tobacco pouch. "That thing down there ain't natural, Kate. It's what happens when you poison the earth for 100 years and something decides to poison you back. Started small, probably just feeding on the chemicals and radiation from the mining operations. But it grew, and it learned." "What do you mean, learned?" "It figured out that miners were the source of its food. So it started hunting them. Not just killing, hunting smart. It would cause accidents that looked natural, collect the bodies, keep them preserved in that toxic water. I think it studies them." "Studies them for what?" "To understand us. To get better at killing us." Jesse's words made horrible sense. The arranged corpses I'd seen through the camera, the way the creature had seemed to move with purpose, it wasn't just a predator. It was a strategist. "How big do you think it is now?" I asked. "Big enough to fill half those tunnels, and getting bigger every year. It feeds on the coal seam fires, the acid drainage, all the poison we left behind. This place is perfect for something like that." I checked my equipment one more time. The explosives were old but stable. The winch cable was rated for 2,000 pounds. The diving gear I'd borrowed from Lynch and Maria's van would protect me from the acidic water, at least for a while. "There's something else you should know," Jesse said as I prepared to enter the shaft. "It don't just kill you quick. It keeps you alive as long as possible, learning from you. Those Geet Overman boys from 78? I heard them screaming down there for 3 days before it went quiet. That should have stopped me. Should have sent me running for help. But I kept thinking about my father, killed by these same mountains when I was 12. I kept thinking about Lynch and Maria, who'd come here to help and gotten pulled into something they couldn't understand. I squeezed through the gap in the grate and started my descent. The water was warmer than I'd expected, and the bioluminescent glow was so bright I barely needed my flashlight. The tunnel walls were covered with that organic phosphorescence, pulsing in slow rhythms like a massive heartbeat. At 100 feet, I found Lynch's equipment, but no sign of Lynch himself. His diving gear was shredded, torn apart by something with claws or teeth, but there was no blood. The acidic water would have dissolved it immediately. I followed the main tunnel deeper into the mine. The passages branched and connected in ways that didn't match any of the mining maps I'd studied. Something had been digging new tunnels, expanding the original mine system into a vast underground complex. At 200 feet, I found Maria. She was alive, but barely, wrapped in some kind of organic webbing that kept her suspended in an air pocket near the tunnel ceiling. Her eyes were open, but she couldn't speak. Something had been done to her throat. I cut her free and activated her emergency oxygen supply. She gasped and tried to talk, but only managed to point deeper into the tunnel. In the direction she was indicating, I could see a much brighter glow. "Lynch?" I whispered. She nodded, then grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she kept shaking her head, mouthing the word "no" over and over. But I had to see. I had to understand what we were really dealing with. I left Maria with the emergency ox, Eigen, and swam deeper into the mine. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern that definitely hadn't been part of the original mining operation. The walls curved upward into darkness, and the entire space glowed with that blue-green light. And there, in the center of it all, was the thing that had been killing miners for a century. It was beautiful and horrible at the same time. 12 feet long, with a body like a giant serpent covered in scales that looked like black coal. But it had dozens of eyes scattered across its length, each one glowing with intelligent light. And at the front end, where a snake would have a head, there was something almost human. A face that looked like it had been assembled from the features of every person it had ever killed. Dr. Lynch was there too, suspended in the same organic webbing that had held Maria, but he was still conscious, still aware. The creature had somehow kept him alive while studying him, learning from him. When it saw me, the thing made that breathing sound I'd heard before, but louder. The whole cavern vibrated with it, and then it spoke. Not in words, but directly into my mind. I could feel its thoughts pressing against my consciousness like cold fingers. Another one comes to feed me. Another one comes to teach me. The creature began moving toward me, its multiple eyes focusing on my face. As it got closer, I could see that its scales weren't just black. They were made of actual coal, somehow incorporated into living tissue. This thing had literally become part of the poisoned earth. "I know your father," it said in my mind. I tasted his fear when the mountain took him. You taste the same. That's when I understood the truth. This creature hadn't just been feeding on the environmental damage from the mines. It had been feeding on the miners themselves, on their fear and pain and death. Every accident, every cave-in, every natural disaster, it had been involved somehow, including the accident that killed my father. I reached for the explosive charges I'd brought, but the creature was faster. One of its coils wrapped around my waist and lifted me out of the water. I could feel the intelligence behind those glowing eyes, ancient and patient and utterly alien. "You will teach me more than the others," it said. "You understand these tunnels. You know how to bring more food." It was going to keep me alive like it had kept Lynch, study me, learn from me, and then use what it learned to kill more people. I managed to activate one of the explosive charges before the creature could stop me. But instead of throwing it, I held on to it. "You want to learn something?" I said out loud. "Learn this." The explosion collapsed half the cavern, but it didn't kill the creature. Nothing that had survived a century of mining disasters and toxic contamination was going to die from a single blast. But it was enough to create chaos, enough to give me a chance. I grabbed Lynch and Maria and made it to the surface as the mine shafts filled with debris and poisonous gas. We were all contaminated. I could feel the radiation burning through my system, changing things at a cellular level. But we were alive. The official EPA report blamed the deaths of Lynch and Maria on structural failure in the abandoned mine system. Their bodies were never found, of course, because I never told anyone I'd gotten them out. I couldn't explain how without sounding completely insane. The government declared the entire Thurmond district a Superfund site and restricted all access. Officially, they were cleaning up environmental contamination from decades of mining. Unofficially, they were trying to contain something they didn't understand and couldn't kill. Jesse Hatfield died 3 months later. Lung cancer, they said. But I know it was more than that. He'd been carrying the secret of the Widowmaker for too long, and it had poisoned him from the inside out. I transferred to a desk job in Charleston after that. Told my supervisors the radiation exposure meant I couldn't do field work anymore. That was partly true. The medical tests showed genetic damage that would only get worse with time. But mostly I just couldn't handle being in the mountains anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel the creature's thoughts pressing against my mind. It's still down there. Deeper now, but still growing. Still learning. The Superfund cleanup crews report equipment failures and strange accidents, but nothing that makes the newspapers. I've been documenting everything for 35 years now. Writing down every detail, every warning sign, every piece of evidence that might help someone understand what's really happening in those mountains. Because the creature isn't going to stay buried forever. The environmental damage we caused created it, fed it, made it stronger, and now it's smart enough to plan, patient enough to wait, and hungry enough to keep growing. When we poison the earth, sometimes the earth poisons back. I'm 70 now, and the radiation exposure is finally catching up with me. The doctors say I have maybe a year left, but before I die, I'm sending copies of this account to every environmental scientist, every government agency, every person who might be able to do something about what's sleeping in the Widowmaker mine, because it's not sleeping anymore. The seismic monitors show movement down there. Slow, deliberate, purposeful movement. The creature is digging again, expanding its territory, getting ready for something, and I think it's getting ready to come up. Last week they found bioluminescent fungus growing near a mine entrance in Pennsylvania. The week before that, there were reports of strange sounds coming from abandoned shafts in Kentucky. The contamination is spreading, and the creature is spreading with it. My name is Catherine Morrison, and I'm the only person left alive who knows what's really down there in the dark. I've spent 40 years trying to warn people, trying to get someone to listen. Now it's up to you to decide what to do with what I've told you. Because ready or not, the coal seam devil is coming. My name is Samuel Whitlock, Sam for short, and I'm a backcountry ranger posted in the Smokies, right along the line where North Carolina and Tennessee rub up against each other. I'm 29 years old, served in Korea, and I took this badge and Stetson hat because the mountains were supposed to give me peace. Quiet. Something different from the shouting and the gunfire and the fear that clung to me long after I got home. The day this all began, it was late November, 1962. Most folks in the country had just finished biting their nails over that mess with the Russians and Cuba, thinking maybe the world was about to end. Out here, though, life kept rolling to the tune of the wind through pine and spruce, and the slow churn of creeks that crawled over rocks hundreds of years old. My post sits near Cataract Falls, a hidden corner of the wilderness only the hardiest locals dare tread. Even now, it's thick with fallen leaves, slick roots, and steep ridges that'll break a man's leg if he's not careful. We've got radio, but it's crackly as hell and doesn't work past a mile or two. Nearest backup's at least 2 days away if you're lucky with the weather in the knees. I wore 3 layers that night, flannel, wool, and heavy canvas, because the mountains had a taste for sinking blizzards without warning. Weathermen down in Bryson City predicted a cold snap, but what we got was something meaner. Biting wind, falling snow, and a fog so thick it moved like milk poured slow over the ground. Snow muffled sounds till even my own breathing felt too loud. I knew the dangers: hypothermia, hidden gorges, and of course the folk who have lived here for generations and never liked the government poking around. Folks like the dockeries, scattered up old hollers and valleys, hard as granite and twice as stubborn. They see us rangers as outsiders, meddlers. But my job was simple. I walk the trail. Ales, I check for folks lost or up to no good, and I write reports that'll mostly collect dust on some government shelf. But some things you find out here, things no report can explain. I'd barely slept when the call came down. Possible illegals still in operation, up on the old Trail of Tears route where the Cherokee were driven out over a century ago. The locals still speak of the ghosts. You can feel their eyes on you sometimes in the hush under the trees. But it's the living that worried me most. I packed my sidearm. Not that it'd do much in a real fight against weather or men with nothing left to lose. I double-checked my flask. Fool's habit from bad war years. I kept it full for nerves, shameful as it is to say. When I stepped out, the last thing I remember was the warmth of the fire and the hope the mountain would spare me from whatever it was hiding that night. The snow was knee-deep as I moved up the valley, ghosting between tree trunks painted silver in the moonlight. On the radio, static hissed, then fizzled to nothing. I had my compass, old Army issue, but the shadows kept shifting, and I found myself checking it more than usual. I followed a set of boot prints, too fresh for this cold. They wound along the riverbank, past ice-slick boulders and under branches heavy with snow. I could smell the telltale tang of corn mash before I saw the still itself, tucked below a cleft in the rocks. The copper gleamed against a patch of dead ground, steam still curling lazy from where the fire had cooked. But the still wasn't right. One barrel lay crushed in on itself, the metal folded like tinfoil. Broken glass sparkled on the mud and snow. I crouched down, mittened fingers brushing along the copper, still warm. Whoever ran this had left in a hurry, but what made them run? That's when I noticed the claw marks, 4 deep grooves, as wide as my thumb and as long as a man's arm, cut clean through the copper. No bear ever did that. I swallowed, the old fight-or-flight rising up behind my ribs. Snow fell harder, but in that dead silence I heard wailing. Not a woman, not a wolf, but something in between. I tried to write it off as wind, maybe an owl. But it came again, closer, making the hair on my neck rise. The air tasted wrong, metallic, like blood. I hurried up toward the dockery place, high above the falls. My boots crunched through dying ferns and patches of earth where nothing grew. In the beam of my flashlight, I caught a shimmer. Trees marked with symbols cut deep and old, shapes that twisted if you stared too long. Cherokee, I thought, or something older. Halfway up the ridge, I found Cora May Dockery. She stood at the edge of a porch that leaned like it was tired of standing. Cora May wore her gray hair in a tight bun, face hard as stone. "You don't belong here, Sam Whitlock," she rasped. "You bring the law, but all you'll find is sorrow. Somebody set up a still near your boundary. Looks like folks ran in a hurry." Her eyes narrowed, lips barely moving. "There are things here you can't write up, Ranger. You see something, you keep it in your heart, or it'll eat you alive." She paused, her hands trembling as she clutched a lantern. "We Dockeries got bad blood. Been that way since the world went sideways. Since they forced the Cherokee down that path, long before the park or your badge." 3 faces peered out from behind her, sharp with fear. "There's folks missing. My boys. If you find them, don't follow too close. Some curses don't break easy." I wanted to scoff. Korea had taught me men were the real monsters. But something about her words chilled me more than the snow. That night, when I bedded down in an old barn, something prowled the trees. The air grew thick, like time itself stretched and snapped. I knew then, something was watching, and whatever it wasn't entirely human. I woke to silence, the kind that swallows sound. The kind that tells you something is already too close. My breath fogged in the cold. The snow outside blew with dawn. I pushed out into the yard, shotgun on my shoulder. Nearby, a deer carcass hung caught in a barbed wire fence, its neck twisted impossibly, chest torn open by claws bigger than any black bear's. Just beyond, fresh tracks pressed deep into the soft snow. Wide, splay-toed marks, almost human but wrong, the stride too long. I followed, nerves raw. War memories flickered, the scent of burning, heart pounding in my ears as if I were back in that trench. But these mountains demanded different tactics. Patience. Observation. I moved downhill toward a hidden hollow, every sense alert. Halfway down, I found more signs. Shredded flannel, dockery colors, stuck to a branch. Crimson blood painted the snow, but the tracks continued. No body. I pressed on, boots sliding, until I heard it. Something crashing through trees with impossible strength, twisting saplings aside like weeds. I drew my sidearm, even as my hand shook. From behind a boulder, I glimpsed it. A shape standing 8 feet tall, back humped, covered in mottled fur, face almost human, almost bare. It sniffed the air, then let out a growl that sent birds shrieking from the trees. I staggered back, silence ringing in my ears. In all my campfire memories, this didn't fit. It was too real, too solid. Worse, its eyes were rimmed with something that looked like pain or rage. I knew deep down, this was no normal beast. This was someone, maybe one of the dockery men, twisted by power beyond what the mind can take. When I tried the radio, only static answered. The temperature dropped. The sun slid behind a veil of fog that settled so thick I lost all sense of time. My watch said noon, but the sky hung dark as dusk. Cora May found me as I staggered back up the ridge, shoes soaked and hands near frozen. "You saw, didn't you?" she asked, voice nearly breaking. I nodded. "What is it?" She sat, lantern flickering, across her lined face. "We betrayed the ones who trusted us. My kin watched Cherokee families sent away. My great-great-granddaddy took blood silver, and the curse found us. Every crisis, it returns, grows worse. This time, Sam, it's not just one. The whole clan feels it. 3 gone missing during the family prayer. They hunt now, as a pack." The cold dug into me. "Why?" "Territory. Fear. Same as war, Sam. A mountain defends itself. You come here with your rules, but the mountain's got its own justice." My mind whirled. Did my uniform make me guilty? I'd come trying to help, but here, my very presence drew violence. Out in the trees, shapes moved, more than one, circling. There would be no easy path out. I set up camp that night in a shallow cave. I didn't sleep. The howls came closer. Sometimes I saw shapes, huge, half-glimpsed, always watching. Sometimes I nearly believed I saw dockery faces twisted in with the snarling jaws. In the morning, one of the dockery women, a cousin I think, was gone. Only a trail of bare footprints led off toward the rocks. We followed, hearts in our throats, but she was already lost. A flash of fur, a howl, then nothing. Loss tasted like blood in my mouth. No one was safe. Not me, not the dockeries, not even the new world trying to root itself here. The blizzard roared through the trees, wind howling like the lost. Fresh snow buried old tracks. The only shelter was a cave system carved into the mountainside, said to be sacred to the Cherokee. If there was a place for curses to gather power, it was here. I stepped inside, flashlight trembling in my grip. The air was thick, charged. My every breath echoed. Carvings lined the walls, animals, spirits, patterns I could not name. As I pressed deeper, the walls pulsed with warmth. I passed through shadows and into a vast chamber. There, in the half-light, stood the dockery pack, 4 hulking figures, fur bristling, teeth bared. At their head, Cora May. But she hadn't changed. She stood tall, eyes bright with unshed tears and a power that felt older than the cursing snowfall. The pack doctor. "You back?" Eyes flickering between her and me. She spoke, her voice echoing off the stone. "Sam, you've walked the path of both predator and prey. You know what it means to lose everything. My family does too. We protect what's ours, even when the world calls us monsters." I had no words. My war training told me to shoot, run, call for help. But my heart, it whispered for me to stop, to look past the horror and see what lay beneath. The dockeries circled, growls growing. My back pressed to the carvings. The cold stone steadied my shaking legs. Cora May lifted her hand, and the pack paused, mid-step. "You could call in your men, Sam. Burn our hollow, mark us for death. But you know what war does." Her gaze met mine. "Will you be the monster that comes for our last home?" Old rage flared. Memories of villages flattened, children lost, orders followed without question. I lowered my gun. "I didn't come to make war here, Cora May. Not again." The cave was deathly silent. Even the blizzard seemed to recede. She nodded, pride and sorrow tangled in her face. "Then we offer you passage if you swear, never again on dockery land." My hands trembled. I remembered frightened faces in Korea. I remembered how easy it was for men to be monsters. I swore. She turned to her family, chanting words older than English. The fur fell back. Huge forms collapsed, shuddering to reveal half-naked dockeries, bruised, bloodied, terribly human. I helped them cover up, guided them out of the cave while Cora May watched me with something close to gratitude. Or maybe it was just deep relief. The snow kept falling for 2 more days, but the violence was done. By dawn, the dockeries disappeared deep into the hills, leaving only the memory of their curses and old grief. I wrote my report the way the system liked, matter-of-fact, full of blanks, still abandoned, no suspects, operators scattered before arrival, no evidence at the scene. But out here the truth is heavier than a badge. I swore to leave the dockeries alone, and as I did, things grew quiet again. The strange marks faded from the trees. My flask stayed full, but these days I hardly touched it. I walked the woods on wary terms, but the mountain let me be. Sometimes at dusk, I saw Cora May at the far edge of the ridge, always watching, a guardian in the old style. Sometimes I heard distant howls that faded into silence. I learned peace isn't the same as safety. Sometimes you have to make your own. And sometimes the real monsters aren't in the shadows or the snow, but in the men who think they have a right to take away someone's home. I'm Sam Whitlock. I keep the mountain's secrets, not out of fear, but respect. And if you ever walk the old road past Cataract Falls, mind your step and mind whose land you're on. Some justice out here is older and sharper than the laws we write on paper. My name is Michael O'Sullivan, but everyone calls me Mick. I'm a park ranger. Been wearing this khaki uniform 15 years now, patrolling these woods up since Carter took office. If you've hiked the trails by Blackwater Falls in West Virginia, chances are you've seen me. Maybe yelled a good morning as I fixed a warning sign, untangled some kid from poison ivy, or dragged a tipsy college boy out of the water. I've got 41 years etched on my face and bones. Got the wide Irish jaw from my mother, what little I remember. People say I've got hands like stone, but they tremble the way yours would if you once tried and failed to snatch your own child from a river. That grief sticks to me like mud under fingernails, never fully washed clean. Dad, rest him, came over from Belfast to dig coal near Elkins. Mom died having me. Dad always said death came for us all, but it didn't need to wear white or wail like the stories my grandmother told. He didn't believe in banshees. Neither did I. But I kept a steel crucifix on the dashboard anyway, just in case old country ghosts took the wrong back road. It was August of 1979, a month when the ground cracked and the streams shrank. Blackwater Falls, usually a rolling, roaring sheet pouring down limestone, was now only a trickle, exposing sullen stones and black, angry puddles. The forest around the gorge was dried out and thirsty, shadows stretching long even before supper. Sometimes you could stand in the empty gorge and feel 20 degrees cooler than outside, but that breeze tasted wrong, like it had picked up secrets from dark water and hidden caves. Budget cuts meant I worked most shifts alone. One man trying to police square miles of ancient highland forest with only a pickup, an old radio full of static, and a rusty compass that spun in wild circles when I walked too close to the plunging pool. Tourists kept coming. Great Crow. WDS eager to do what was usually forbidden. Climb rocks bare for the first time in living memory. Crawl into mouths of cave systems normally drowned in spray. Some let their kids scramble onto the limestone ledges where a slip would mean shattered bones. On the quiet midnights, when I made my rounds under the humming wires and hooting owls, it felt like all of history breathed here. Scots-Irish settlers, bootleggers, Civil War ghosts, memories of ancient deaths in cold black water. And then the reports began. A nervous teenage girl came running, tears streaked down her face, saying she'd heard a woman sobbing near the falls at midnight. I took down her story, marked it as stress, or maybe a prank, but it stuck. The tone in her voice, the way she said, "It wasn't natural, Mr. O'Sullivan. She was hurting. Please make it stop." I promised I'd look into it. That's how it always starts, with a small voice nagging you, telling you something's off. Maybe just drought and fear. I told myself that, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Next day I logged 4 more complaints, all after dark. Campers, hikers, even old Charlie Miller who'd lived here 60 years. Young or old, they repeated the same thing. A woman's voice, crying, always somewhere near the narrowest stretch of the limestone gorge where the falls used to thunder. Some saw flickers of white on the rocks. Others only heard the keening, rising and falling, echoing all through the hollow like the wind. I started collecting stories in my battered notepad. They lined up too close, always late at night, always by the dry pool, always a woman's cry that chilled bone and blood. I took the stories home, laying them beside the older tales my father used to mumble after a few whiskeys of an evening. The banshee, the white woman in the glen, the washer at the ford who scrubs the grave clothes of the soon-to-die. Old country nonsense, or so I had always believed. But soon, stories turned to incidents. 2 boys from Ohio climbed into a cave now visible beyond the shrunken water. They came out wild-eyed, saying they'd spotted a lady kneeling by the pool, combing out tangled gray hair, her dress soaked and muddy. I tried comforting them, told them it was imagination or an old park volunteer. Even as I said it, I felt like lying to both the kids and myself. Hazards grew worse. Slick rocks, roots hanging like ropes, sharp debris washed out by the low flow. One morning I fished out a rotten boot, and then the blackened beam of an old wagon. Then a collection of women's hairpins and bracelets, half calcified from decades of pooling water. Bones, too. Animal, I told myself, but unease crawled up my neck. That midnight, my radio crackled so loud it made me jump. "Ranger O'Sullivan, you there?" It was a young mother camping with her family. She spoke in panicked whispers. "Something's outside our tent," crying, like a mother who's lost her child. Something pulled at me to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and gear, made for the pool. The beam caught sight of the shallow water, reflecting moonlight like black glass. The air felt wrong, cold and thick. The crying rose up, louder and closer this time, rattling the gorge like a choir of grief. I stepped closer. Sudden movement. A flicker of white by the waterline. Thin figure hugging herself, sobbing, skin pale as washed bone. For a moment, I froze. Heart in my mouth, I remembered the tales I'd always dismissed, about the woman who appears before a tragedy. But the rational part of me barked out, "Get your head together, Mick. This is just a local, maybe hurt." I called out, telling her to show herself. She stopped crying. looked up. Her eyes were red, hollow, full of water. I blinked. When I looked again, she was gone. The crying floated back up the gorge, high and horrible. On my way back, I stepped into a hole deeper than I remembered, fell hard onto my back. The flashlight flew from my grasp, skittering across the rocks, light dancing over pee. Al fingers gripping the far side of the pool before vanishing. Was it just my mind, exhausted and haunted? I limped out, shaken and silent, radio hissing at my hip. In the safety of the station's orange glow, I stared at my own reflection in the glass and thought, you can't run water rescues your whole life and never get pulled under. That was the first night I started to believe the stories might be true. Within days, the entire canyon seemed to change. Air colder than August had any right to be, shadows bending the wrong way, sounds echoing in endless circles. Night after night, the wailing grew bolder, each cry a little nearer, a little sharper, sometimes almost a warning, sometimes a curse. The visitor numbers jumped as news spread. Woman in white seen at Blackwater, whispered in bars and truck stops from Parsons to Elkins. Parents clung tighter to their children. Yet curiosity dragged people in, and so did the sun. A drought like this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see what the forest usually hid. The worst happened on a Sunday. The park was full, parents letting kids explore. Bobby Chen, an 8-year-old with knots of dark hair and tennis shoes much too big, slipped away from his parents chasing a salamander. The rocks were slick. I saw him too late. One slip, a scream, a splash into the deep pool, dark as ink. I ran, pumping legs that once saved swimmers with ease, but fear was now faster. His parents, tourists from Washington, D.C., stood up above, searching the cliffs. Suddenly, both froze, staring at the far bank. Later, they said a woman in white appeared there, wailing, hair floating unnatural around her face, hands red and wringing out something lost. No one found Bobby for nearly an hour, though the plunge pool was shallow. When I pulled him free, his skin was cold, eyes wide and empty. The banshee's warning, I realized. She didn't cause this, but she lied to tell us. Afterward, the parents sobbed to me about the woman's face, repeating the same things from old country stories. She looked right through me. She was crying, begging us to run. Grief weighed me down like my old water rescue gear back when my own son was lost. That night, I didn't even pretend to sleep. I read all the folklore I could, records from settlers who spoke of a keening woman whenever someone drowned in hard times. The pattern was horrifying. Each drought year, spikes in deaths, always children first. The apparition came afterwards, a warning, not a killer. I started seeing signs everywhere. Compasses spun uncontrollably. Birds didn't fly near the falls. Deer avoided the gorge. Even the water itself looked warped, almost like a mirror trying to show me something wrong beneath. It got worse. The banshee came for me, appearing at the water's edge as cold wind rose up, hair flowing, face streaked in tears. She held out hands, stained with something dark, and in the water's surface I saw my boy's face, pale and gasping, over and over, as if the river would never let him go. Memories burned me, but something else nested there, the sense she was not just watching, but reaching out. Her vision twisted through time itself. She mourned for everyone the water would take, and for all those, like me, left behind. I wanted to run. But how do you escape your own past, or the eyes of the dead? Late August storms are wild things. We watched for them, as even tiny squalls could become deadly in a dried-out gorge. That Saturday, the crowds were bigger than they'd ever been. We were close to Labor Day. The sky was thick and bruised, thunder muttering far away. Around noon, I got a chill, then a sense of panic, like when, as a child, Dad would grab my collar and shout, "Get away from the pit!" My compass spun wildly. The birds went dead quiet. Then came a wailing scream. Hundreds heard it. The sound cut through the park loud enough to break the humming air, echoing off every stone. People froze. Some backed away, some ran, some just stared, wild with fear, and I sprinted to the center of the gorge. At the edge of the falls, what little remained of it, stood the banshee, tall and as real as any living woman. Her gray hair whipped around her, eyes wild with warning. She pointed up the river, voice booming, mournful and desperate. "Go! Now!" Logic said it was wind or a prank or maybe heat exhaustion, but my heart knew better. I faced the crowd, yelling with everything left in me. "Get away from the water! Flash flood coming! Back now! Move!" Some said I looked possessed. Others obeyed because fear is contagious. The banshee vanished as the first cold droplets fell, but thunder pounded the valley, and I trusted my instincts. No, I trusted her. We swept the tourists up the safety trail, mothers crying, people stumbling, children clinging to hands. My radio gave nothing but static, compass, no help, but gut and ghost did not fail. The rumble came first, then a wall of water, brown and swirling, full of old debris, smashing through where we'd just stood, ripping away tents and backpacks, crashing down the empty gorge. If anyone had still been on those slick rocks, they'd have died. Only later, once the sun came back, did people whisper again about the crying woman in white who saved us. I just told the paper I had a gut feeling. The banshee didn't want her name in the news. That night I went to the falls. She stood waiting, surrounded by wind, tears on her face. She showed me my son, safe, at peace, smiling for the first time in my dreams. I understood at last. Sometimes, death sends a messenger to save, not kill. I still wear the uniform, still patrol the wild hills, but I listen now to warnings others can't hear. When whispers in the wind turn to crying by the water, I pause. I watch. Sometimes I see a pale woman standing where the spray used to thunder, combing her hair and mourning every soul lost to the black currents. Folks gossip, me a citation for bravery, called me a hero. But only I know the full truth. I was just the one who listened. Each season, when the rivers swell or shrink, I make my rounds and remember, the banshee isn't a monster, but a guardian doing her best. She can't stop all deaths, but she'll warn you if you let yourself hear. Sometimes, deep in the haunted quiet before dawn, she and I meet by the water's edge. I thank her for watching, and she nods, her sadness easing with every life saved. The forest will never be empty, not of grief, not of ghosts, not of old wounds healing. Death has its messengers, I whisper as I walk up from the gorge, and sometimes they're trying to help. And in that cool, shadowed place by the falls, I think, for the first time in years, I'm at peace. My name is Clayton Ashworth, and I've been pulling people out of caves for 16 years. Started when I was 22, fresh out of college with a geology degree and more confidence than sense. Now I'm 38, and I know these West Virginia mountains like the back of my weathered hands. Devil's Backbone Ridge is what brought me out here on this cold October morning in 1978. The name fits. It's a 15-mile stretch of jagged limestone that cuts through the Monongahela National Forest like the spine of some buried monster. My grandfather used to work these mountains back when they were still pulling coal out of them. He died in a cave-in when I was just a kid. My little brother Tommy followed him into the mines when he turned 18. Another cave-in took him too, just 3 years ago. That's why I do what I do. Nobody else is going to die underground on my watch if I can help it. The call came in yesterday morning. 4 college kids from Virginia Tech had been exploring the caves up on Devil's Backbone. They were supposed to check in every 12 hours. That was 36 hours ago. Their last radio message was garbled, something about lights in the deep chambers. Made no sense. There shouldn't be any lights down there except what you bring with you. I loaded my truck with the usual gear: ropes, pulleys, gas detector, first aid kit, emergency oxygen. The drive up the mountain took 45 minutes on roads that barely deserved the name. Autumn had been warm this year, but last night brought the first real cold snap. The trees were just starting to turn, and fog hung low in the hollows between the ridges. The students' camp was still there at the main cave entrance. 2 tents, a cold fire pit, and gear scattered around like they'd left in a hurry, or like something had made them leave in a hurry. I found their permits and maps tucked inside one of the tents. Now, smart kids. They'd done their research, marked all the safe routes, brought proper equipment, so why weren't they back? I radioed the ranger station. "This is Ashworth at Devil's Backbone. Found the missing students' camp. Heading into the cave system now." "Copy, Clayton. Weather Service says we might get heavy rain tonight. Those caves flood fast." I knew that. Hell, I'd mapped most of these caves myself. The limestone here is like Swiss cheese, full of holes and underground rivers. When it rains hard, water comes pouring down from the surface and turns those pretty little streams into death traps. The cave entrance yawned open like a mouth full of broken teeth. I checked my gear one more time, switched on my headlamp, and stepped into the darkness. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not the usual cave smell of damp earth and minerals, but something else. Something that reminded me of my grandfather's old mining clothes. Coal dust and sweat, and something deeper. Something wrong. My footsteps echoed strangely in the entrance chamber. The sound bounced around in ways that didn't make sense, like the walls were shaped different than they looked. I'd been in this cave dozens of times, but tonight it felt different. I found the first sign of the students about 50 yards in. A water bottle, dropped right in the middle of the path, then a flashlight, its batteries still good, then something that made my blood run cold. A pickaxe. Old, rusted, the kind miners used back in my grandfather's day. It was stuck in the cave wall like someone had just been using it. But there hadn't been any mining in these caves for 20 years. I pulled out my gas detector and swept the area. The readings made no sense. High methane levels where there shouldn't be any gas at all. The temperature was all wrong, too. Warm patches in air that should have been cold. That's when I heard it. Faint, coming from deeper in the cave. The sound of metal striking stone, rhythmic, like someone working with a pickaxe, like someone mining. I followed the sound deeper into the cave, my headlamp cutting through darkness that seemed thicker than it should be. The main tunnel split into 3 passages about 100 yards from the entrance. According to the students' map, they'd planned to explore the middle passage, the safest route, leading to a large chamber with an underground stream. The pickaxe sounds were coming from the left passage, the one that, according to my surveys, dead-ended after about 200 feet. I should have gone right, followed the students' planned route, should have stuck to protocol. But that sound, it was regular, purposeful, like someone was actually working down there, and if someone was working, maybe they'd seen the missing kids. The left passage sloped downward, and the air got warmer as I went deeper. My gas detector kept beeping, methane levels that should have been impossible in this part of the cave system. The sound of the pickaxe got louder, clearer. I could hear the ring of metal on stone, the scrape of something being dug out. The passage opened into a chamber I'd never seen before. That was impossible. I'd mapped every inch of these caves. But there it was, a round room about 30 feet across, with passages leading off in directions that couldn't exist. And there, in the center of the chamber, was the first body. It was Michael Chen, one of the missing students. His Virginia Tech ID was still clipped to his jacket. But something was wrong with where I found him. He was lying half in, half out of the solid rock wall, like he'd been trying to crawl through stone. I rushed over, checked for a pulse. Nothing. His skin was cold, but not the cold of death, the cold of stone. When I touched his arm, it felt hard, like it was turning to rock itself. His watch had stopped at 3:47. According to the timeline his friends had given the Rangers, Michael had been alive and talking on the surface at 4:15 yesterday. How? Do you die 15 minutes before you're supposed to die? I tried the radio. Static. The limestone in these caves could block signals, but I'd never had complete radio failure before. I was on my own. The pickaxe sound had stopped while I was examining the body. Now the chamber was silent except for the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. But I could feel something watching me. That feeling you get when eyes are on you, even when you can't see them. I swept my headlamp around the chamber walls. The beam caught something that made my heart skip. scratches in the stone. Fresh scratches like someone had been carving with metal tools. They formed letters, rough and deep. Help us still here, still working. Below that, in different handwriting, Tommy Ashworth, 1975. My brother's name. The year he died. I stumbled backward, my light swinging wildly. The beam caught movement in one of the side passages. A figure, there for just a second, then gone. But long enough to see the mining helmet, the old-style clothes, the pickaxe in its hands. Long enough to see that the face under that helmet looked like Tommy. Tommy? My voice cracked like a teenager's. Tommy, is that you? The sound that came back wasn't my brother's voice. It was deeper, hollow, like wind blowing through empty spaces. But the words were clear enough. Clay, Ton, come work. With us. I ran, turned and sprinted back up the passage, my light bouncing crazily off the walls. Behind me, I could hear the pickaxe sounds starting up again. Not just one pickaxe now. Dozens of them, ringing through the stone like some hellish orchestra. I made it back to the main passage and stopped, gasping. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my flashlight steady. I tried to think rationally. Lack of oxygen could cause hallucinations. So could methane poisoning. There had to be a logical explanation. But when I looked back at the left passage, it wasn't there anymore. Just solid rock wall, like there had never been an opening at all. I checked my watch. I'd been in the cave for 2 hours, but it felt like minutes. Time was doing funny things down here. I took the middle passage, following the students' planned route. I had to find the other 3 kids. Had to get them out before whatever had happened to Michael happened to them. The passage led to the main chamber, just like my map said it would. But when I got there, I found something that shouldn't exist. Mining equipment, lots of it. Pickaxes, shovels, wooden support beams, even an old cart on rusty rails. All of it looked like it was from the 1800s. All of it looked like it was still being used. And scattered among the equipment, I found the rest of the students. Sarah Martinez was the first one I found. She was sitting against the cave wall, eyes open, breathing shallow, alive, but barely. When I shook her shoulder, she looked at me without recognition. Sarah? Sarah, can you hear me? She blinked slowly. When she spoke, her voice was distant, dreamy. The shift whistle hasn't blown yet. Still got coal to dig. I checked her pulse. Slow, but steady. Her skin felt cold like Michael's had, but she was still warm enough to be alive, still human enough to save. Sarah, you're not a miner. You're a college student. Your name is Sarah Martinez, and you're from Richmond, Virginia. You came here with your friends to explore caves. For a moment, her eyes cleared. Clayton? Oh, God. Clayton, you have to get us out of here. They want us to work. They want us to stay forever. Who wants you to work? The miners, the dead miners. They've been working down here since forever. They're so lonely, Clayton. They just want someone to work alongside them. Before I could ask more questions, her eyes went vacant again. Back to work, she mumbled. Coal won't mine itself. I found Jessica Wong about 20 feet away, standing in front of a wall of solid rock, making the motions of swinging a pickaxe. But she wasn't moved to holding anything. Her hands were cut and bleeding from hitting stone. Jessica! I grabbed her arms, stopping the motion. Jessica, snap out of it. She looked at me with confused eyes. Who's Jessica? My name's Mary. Been working this seam for 30 years. She had a slight accent that wasn't hers. Something rural, old-fashioned. You new here? Haven't seen you before. The 4th student, David Kim, was the worst. I found him 20 feet inside the chamber's back wall, not pressed against it, inside it. Somehow the rock had flowed around him like water, then hardened again. Only his head and one arm were still sticking out. He was conscious. That was the worst part. Help me, he whispered when he saw me. I can't move. The rock. It's alive, Clayton. It's alive. And it's hungry. I tried everything I could think of. Used my pickaxe to chip away at the stone around him, but for every piece I broke off, More seemed to flow back into place. The rock was warm under my tools, and sometimes I swear I could feel it pulse like a heartbeat. How long have you been like this? Hours, maybe days. Time's funny down here. Clayton, listen to me. This whole cave system, it's not just rock. It's them. The miners who died here. They're part of the stone now, part of the mountain, and they want us to join them. That's impossible. Look around you, man. Look at this equipment. Look at your friends. Does any of this seem possible? He was right. The mining equipment was growing more solid, more real by the minute. I could see details now that hadn't been there before. Names carved into pickaxe handles, personal belongings scattered around old lunch pails, a photograph of a woman and children tucked into the band of a mining helmet. And the helmet looked familiar. I picked it up, turned it over. Scratched into the metal was a name. T. Ashworth. Tommy's helmet. The one he'd been airing when the roof came down on him and 6 other miners 3 years ago. That's when I understood. This wasn't just any mine. This was the mine where Tommy died, where my grandfather died. 50 years before that, where dozens of men had died over the decades, cave-in after cave-in, accident after accident, and they were all still here. Clayton. David's voice was getting weaker. I can feel them in the stone. All of them. They're not evil. They're just lonely. They've been working alone in the dark for so long. They want company. They want family. The sound of pickaxes started up again, coming from every direction now. But there was something else mixed in with the mining sounds. Voices. Men singing old work songs, the kind miners used to sing to keep time while they worked. I knew some of those songs. My grandfather used to sing them. One voice rose above the others, clear and strong, a voice I recognized. Deep in the mountain, boys, deep in the ground, coals all around us, waiting to be found. Work through the darkness, work through the day, dig out the black gold, that's how we get paid. Tommy's voice, Tommy's favorite mining song. The chamber was getting brighter, but not from my headlamp. A warm golden glow was coming from the walls themselves, like dozens of carbide lamps burning just under the surface of the stone, and I could see them now. Shadowy figures moving through the rock like it was water, pickaxes swinging, carts rolling on phantom rails. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All the miners who'd ever died in these mountains, still working their eternal shifts. My grandfather was there, looking just like I remembered him from old photographs. He smiled when he saw me, raised a ghostly hand in greeting, and beside him, solid as life, was Tommy. "Hey, big brother," Tommy said, stepping out of the wall like it was a doorway. "Been waiting for you to join us." Tommy looked exactly like he had the day he died. 21 years old, broad shoulders, that crooked grin that had gotten him in trouble since he was a kid. But his eyes were different. Ferrant now. They held depths that went down further than any mine shaft. "You look good, Clay. Little older, maybe, but good." I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "I know this is hard to understand," Tommy said, stepping closer. "Took me a while to figure it out, too. When the roof came down on us, I thought that was it, the end. But it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning." Behind him, I could see the other miners. My grandfather was there, nodding at me with quiet pride. Men in overalls and mining helmets, their faces black with coal dust, their carbide lamps casting dancing shadows on the walls. "We become part of the mountain," Tommy continued. "Part of the stone, part of the earth. But we keep our minds, our memories. And we keep working, because that's what we've always done. It's what we know." "Tommy, you're dead." My voice came out as a whisper. "Am I? I'm standing here talking to you, aren't I? I'm more alive now than I ever was up there on the surface. Down here there's purpose, there's belonging, there's family." He gestured to the other figures moving through the stone. "All of us, Clay. All the men who died in these mountains. We're together now. We take care of each other. No one's alone anymore." "What about them?" I pointed to the students. Sarah was still sitting against the wall, mumbling about coal quotas. Jessica was back to swinging her invisible pickaxe. David was sinking deeper into the rock. "They'll understand soon," Tommy said. "It's hard at first, letting go of the surface world. But once they do, once they accept their new family, they'll be happy. Happier than they ever were up there. You can't do this to them. They have lives, families, futures." So did we. Tommy's expression darkened. So did Grandpa. So did all of us. But nobody mourned us when we died. Nobody remembered us except to put our names on a memorial piet. Laquais somewhere. Down here, we matter. Down here, we're never forgotten. The walls around us pulsed like a heartbeat. I could feel the weight of the mountain above us, the presence of all, those trapped souls pressing down. The air was getting thicker, harder to breathe. "I won't let you take them," I said. "It's not up to you, big brother. Look around. You're surrounded by solid rock. No way out except the way we choose to let you out, and we're not choosing to let you go." He was right. The passages we'd come through were gone, sealed off by walls of living stone. The chamber was smaller now, the ceiling lower. The rock was closing in, making space for one more miner. "But here's the thing, Clay," Tommy continued, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "We don't want to force you. We want you to come willingly. We want you to understand what we're offering." "What are you offering?" "Family. Forever. No more loneliness, no more grief, no more wondering what happened to the people you've lost. We're all here, Clay, all the Ashworths who ever worked these mountains, and we're waiting for you." I could see them now, emerging from the walls. My grandfather, his father's father. Generations of Ashworth men who died underground, all of them reaching out to me with ghostly hands. "Think about it," Tommy said. "What's waiting for you up there? An empty house? A job that'll wear you down until you're just another dead ranger? Down here, you'll never be alone again. Down here, you'll always have purpose." The temptation was real. God help me, it was real. I'd been lonely since Tommy died, since my parents passed. The job was all I had, and even that was starting to feel hollow. But then I looked at David, still trapped in the wall, his eyes pleading with me to save him. At Sarah and Jessica, losing themselves piece by piece to whatever was happening to them. What about them? What about their families? Their families will mourn and move on, just like everyone always does. But down here, they'll be part of something eternal, part of the mountain itself. The walls were definitely closing in now. The ceiling was so low I had to duck. In a few more minutes, there wouldn't be room for anything but solid stone. "Choose, Clayton," Tommy said. "Choose now. Join us willingly, and you'll keep your mind, your memories, your sense of self. Fight us, and you'll become just another trapped soul, screaming in the rock until you accept what you can't change." I looked at my brother's face, saw the genuine love there, saw the loneliness of decades spent working in the dark, felt the pull of family, of belonging, of never having to face loss again. Then I made my choice. "I'm sorry, Tommy, but I can't. And I won't let you take them either." His face fell. "Clay, please, don't make this harder than it has to be." I pulled out my emergency flare, the one I always carried for cave rescues. The red light blazed to life, filling the chamber with harsh chemical illumination. The ghostly miners recoiled, their forms becoming less solid. "Iron," I said, remembering something my grandfather had told me as a child. "Cold iron disrupts spirits." I pulled out my pickaxe, modern steel, not the old iron tools the miners had used. The blade rang like a bell as I struck the wall where David was trapped. Sparks flew, and I could hear screaming from inside the stone. But the rock cracked. David's arm came free. "That won't work for long," Tommy warned. "This is our place, Clay. Our home. You can't fight all of us." He was right. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, and they were getting solid again, adjusting to the flare's light. But I had one more card to play. I started singing. "Deep in the mountain, boys, deep in the ground. It was the same work song they'd been singing earlier, Tommy's favorite. But I sang it different. Not as a celebration of mining life, but as a lament for lives cut short. Coals all around us, black as the gray. Av, work through the darkness, work like a slave. Die in the mountain, die all alone. Nothing left of you but dust and bone. The miners stopped moving, the walls stopped closing. For a moment, the chamber was completely silent. Then my grandfather stepped forward. "Boy's right," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "This ain't living, this is just existing. We've been holding on to something that's already gone." "Pa, no," Tommy said. "We finally have a chance to be together again. We had our time, son. These young folks, they deserve their chance too." The old man looked at me with eyes that held decades of regret. "Get them out of here, Clayton. Get them out while you still can. And when you do..." He smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like I remembered from childhood. "Remember us as we were, not as we became." The walls began to pull back. The ceiling rose. One by one, the ghostly miners faded back into the stone, their carbide lamps dimming to nothing. Tommy was the last to go. "I love you, big brother," he said. "Always have, always will. But Grandpa's right. This isn't the life I'd want for you." "Tommy, wait." But he was gone, dissolved back into the living rock that had held him for 3 years. I worked fast, pulling David free from the wall while I still could. He came out covered in stone dust, but alive, breathing, human. Sarah and Jessica snapped out of their trances as the miner's influence faded, confused and scared but unhurt. We made it out of the cave just as the first drops of rain began to fall. By the time we reached the students' camp, it was pouring. Within an hour, the cave system was flooded, just like it had been dozens of times before. The official report blamed the students' disappearance on a cave-in caused by unstable limestone formations. Michael Chen's body was never found. The rescue team said the passage where I'd discovered him didn't exist. According to the surveys, there was nothing but solid rock in that direction. They transferred me to surface operations after that. Said I'd been in underground too long, needed a change of scenery. Maybe they were right. I still hear things sometimes when I'm alone in the woods. The sound of pickaxes ringing against stone, men's voices singing work songs in the wind. But I also started visiting the old cemetery where my grandfather and Tommy are buried. I bring flowers, clean the headstones, tell them about my life up on the surface. And sometimes, when the light is just right, I think I see them there among the other graves, not as the desperate, hungry spirits they'd become, but as the men they'd been in life. The cave entrance is sealed now, has been for 45 years. But locals still report strange lights moving through the mountain on quiet nights. Still hear the sound of mining equipment echoing up from deep underground. Sarah, Jessica, and David all recovered fully. They went back to college, graduated, got on with their lives. But none of them ever went underground again. Smart kids. I'm retiring next month. 57 years old, and I figure I've pulled enough people out of dangerous places. My replacement is a young woman from Colorado, sharp as a tack and eager to prove herself. She reminds me of myself when I first started. I told her about Devil's Backbone Ridge yesterday. Told her it was off limits, that the cave system was unstable and prone to flooding. She nodded and made notes, professional and thorough. But I could see it in her eyes. The same curiosity that had driven me. The same need to explore every dark corner and hidden passage. Sooner or later, she'll make her way up to that ridge. They always do. When that happens, I hope she remembers what I told her about the old mining songs. How they can call spirits back to rest if you sing them right. How the dead miners aren't evil, just lonely. How sometimes the kindest thing you can do is help them remember they're not alive anymore. And I hope she never has to learn these things the hard way, like I did. Because somewhere deep in Devil's Backbone Ridge, beneath hundreds of tons of rock and decades of flooding, the Hollow Men are still down there, still working their eternal shifts, still hoping that someday someone will join them in the darkness and make the loneliness go away. But as long as people remember them, really remember them, not just as cautionary tales, but as the men they were, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for in the end. To be remembered as we lived, not as we died. To have our names carved in something more lasting than stone. To know that somewhere up in the light, someone is telling our story. My name is Thomas Brightwater, and I've spent 18 years keeping people alive around water. Not many folks can say they've never lost someone on their watch, but I can. At least I could until last August. I'm a water rescue specialist for Kentucky State Parks, and I know every dangerous current, every hidden rock, every place where the water gets hungry in these mountains. My Cherokee grandmother used to say water has a spirit, that it remembers every soul it's ever taken. I never believed that nonsense. Water's just physics, pressure, flow, temperature. You understand the science. You save lives. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 3 kids had nearly drowned at Blackwater Falls in the past week. 3 separate incidents, all at the same spot in the plunge pool. That's not normal. Water doesn't suddenly turn deadly without reason. Blackwater Falls drops 80 feet through a sandstone gorge in Daniel Boone National Forest. The Cherokee considered it sacred, used it for purification ceremonies. These days, it's just another swimming hole where city folks come to cool off and underestimate nature. I drove up the winding mountain road with my rescue gear rattling in the back of my truck. The falls had been running high all summer after the heavy rains broke our drought. High water means new hazards. Shifted rocks, changed currents, debris dams that can trap a swimmer underwater. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Most waterfalls have a steady roar, but Blackwater Falls had something else mixed in. A sort of echo that didn't quite match the splash of water hitting stone. It reminded me of children playing, but there were no children anywhere near the water. I set up my equipment at the edge of the plunge pool, 30 feet deep, dark as coffee, fed by that massive waterfall pounding down from above. The mist hung thick in the air, making everything slippery and hard to see. Perfect conditions for accidents. I'd read the incident reports on the drive up. First kid, Tommy Martinez, age 9. His parents found him floating face down near the middle of the pool. He claimed he'd been playing with other children underwater, that they'd been holding their breath in some kind of game. When his lungs gave out, he said the other kids pushed him to the surface. Second incident, Sarah Chen, age 7. Same story. She was playing with children she couldn't see clearly through the churning water. When she started to drown, something guided her to shore. Third kid, Marcus Thompson, age 10, found unconscious on the rocks, no memory of how he got there. His last memory was playing with pale children who moved through the water like fish. 3 kids, 3 impossible stories. Parents grateful their children were alive, but confused by the details. None of them mentioned seeing other children in the water. I clipped my safety line to a sturdy pine and waded into the pool. The water was surprisingly warm for late August, except for random cold spots that made my skin prickle. I'd felt temperature variations before, underground springs, shadowed areas, but these felt different, more deliberate. Using my underwater camera, I mapped the bottom of the pool. Solid rock walls dropped straight down, riddled with small caves and ledges where debris could catch. No obvious hazards that would explain 3 near drownings in 1 week. That's when I heard it clearly. Children's laughter coming from somewhere beneath the surface. I looked around. The area was completely empty except for me. Yet I could hear kids playing, their voices mixing with the crash of falling water. I told myself it was echo effects. Sound does strange things around waterfalls. But as I stood there in that warm water with cold spots touching my legs like invisible hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced in all my years of water rescue. I felt like I was being watched. I spent 3 hours documenting every inch of that pool, photographing rock formations and measuring water flow. Everything looked normal through my equipment, but the feeling of being watched never went away. Sometimes I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, quick flashes of pale shapes underwater, but when I turned to look directly, nothing was there. The laughter came and went like radio static. Sometimes clear, sometimes so faint I wondered if I was imagining it. But it was definitely children's voices, speaking in a mix of English and what sounded like Cherokee. My grandmother had taught me some Cherokee when I was small, before my parents decided I needed to focus on more practical things. I recognized a few words: water, help, protect. The voices seemed to be calling out, but not in distress, more like they were trying to communicate. I was preparing to leave when a family arrived, the Hendersons from Louisville with their 8-year-old daughter Emma. They'd driven up for a day trip, unaware of the recent incidents. I should have warned them off, but the pool looked perfectly safe in the afternoon sunlight. Just stay in the shallow areas, I told them. The currents can be tricky near the falls. Emma was a strong swimmer, confident and fearless in that way kids are before they learn the world can hurt them. She reminded me painfully of my own daughter, Katie. Same age, same dark hair, same way of diving underwater and staying down longer than seemed possible. Katie had drowned 5 years ago in a lake in Tennessee. Freak accident. She'd gotten tangled in submerged fishing line while swimming near our campsite. By the time I found her, it was too late. I'd spent my whole career saving other people's children from the water, but I couldn't save my own. Emma Henderson disappeared beneath the surface near the center of the pool. Her parents were sunbathing on the rocks, not paying close attention. 3 seconds passed. A minute. Kids can hold their breath a long time, but not this long. I was already moving, diving in with my rescue gear, when Emma popped up gasping near the shore. She was 50 feet from where she'd gone under, in shallow water where the current couldn't have carried her. "Emma," her mother called. "How did you get over there?" Emma looked confused, treading water easily in the shallows. "The other kids brought me. We were playing a game." I swam over to her quickly. "What other kids, honey?" "The ones in the old-timey clothes. They were underwater with me, showing me the caves. When I got scared, they helped me swim to the safe part." Her parents weren't concerned. Kids have active imaginations, especially around exciting places like waterfalls. But I knew what I'd seen. Emma had been underwater for nearly 2 minutes. No 8-year-old can hold their breath that long. And when I dived in to rescue her, my underwater camera had captured something impossible. Reviewing the footage later, I could see Emma clearly, floating 20 feet down in the middle of the pool. But around her, barely visible as pale outlines in the churning water, were other children, at least 5 of them, surrounding Emma, guiding her toward shore. Children in what looked like 1960s school clothes. Children who moved through the water without creating bubbles, without kicking or struggling for air. Children who shouldn't exist. That night in my motel room, I researched the history of Blackwater Falls. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. September 15th, 1962. A school bus from Harlan County had skidded off the old bridge during a flash flood. 12 children, ages 6 to 12, had drowned when the bus was swept into the gorge above the falls. Their bodies were recovered over the following weeks, scattered through the pools and caves downstream. The accident made national news for a few days, then was forgotten. Just another tragedy in a part of Kentucky where tragedies weren't uncommon. I found their names in the old newspaper archives. Billy Patterson, age 11. Sarah Mullins, age 8. Robert Chen, no relation to the recent victim, just coincidence. 12 children who should have grown up, gotten married, had children of their own. Instead, they died in these dark waters 30 years ago. I sat in that motel room staring at their school photos, 12 young faces smiling at the camera, unaware they had only days left to live. And I started to understand what I was really dealing with at Blackwater Falls. Those children were still there, still in the water, still trying to help. I should have reported my findings and requested backup, should have called in a full safety team and closed the swimming area until we could figure out what was happening. Instead, I went back to the falls alone the next morning. I told myself I needed more evidence, more documentation. Really, I needed to see her again, because in that underwater footage, in those brief glimpses of pale children guiding Emma to safety, I'd recognized a face. Dark hair floating like seaweed, familiar brown eyes, a small scar on her chin from falling off her bike when she was 6. Katie. My daughter. My little girl who'd drowned 5 years ago in a lake 200 miles away was somehow here, in these mountain waters, trying to save other children from her fate. The morning mist hung heavy over the pool when I arrived. No other visitors yet. It was early, and the recent accidents had scared off some of the regular families. I suited up in my diving gear, checked my underwater cameras and lights, and prepared to go deeper than I'd ever gone in Blackwater Falls. The Cherokee believed certain places were thin spots between worlds, where spirits could cross over. My grandmother used to warn me about swimming in sacred waters, said the spirits might decide to keep me. I'd always thought it was just another old story meant to keep children safe. Now I wondered if those stories contained more truth than science. 20 feet down, the water turned from brown to black. My lights carved weak cones through the murk, illuminating rock walls carved smooth by centuries of falling water. 30 feet down, I found the first cave entrance, a narrow opening barely wide enough for a child to swim through. That's when I heard her voice. "Daddy?" Clear as daylight, despite being underwater with a regulator in my mouth. Katie's voice, calling from somewhere in the darkness ahead. "Daddy, you came back!" I followed the voice deeper into the cave system, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was impossible. Katie was dead. I'd held her cold body in my arms, had watched them lower her coffin into the ground. But impossibility doesn't make a father's heart stop hoping. The cave opened into a larger chamber, and there they were. 12 children floating in the still water, their 1960s school clothes drifting around them like kelp. They glowed with a soft phosphorescence, their skin pale blue-white, their eyes reflecting my dive lights like mirrors. And among them, wearing the little pink swimsuit she'd died in, was Katie. "Hi, Daddy," she said, her voice somehow reaching me through the water. "I've been waiting for you." They moved toward me as a group, these children who shouldn't exist. Not threatening, but not entirely safe either. I could feel the supernatural cold radiating from them, see the sadness in their ancient young eyes. "We've been helping," Katie said. "The water takes so many children. We try to save them when we can." The boy I recognized as Billy Patterson from the newspaper photos nodded. "Been doing it since we died. Someone has to watch over the swimming holes, the lakes, the rivers. Too many kids like us, dying too young. But we need help," added Sarah Mullins, her pigtails floating around her head. "More sea. Children are in danger. The water's getting hungry again." As if to prove her point, I heard splashing from above. Another family had arrived at the falls. Through the cave opening, I could see legs kicking at the surface, someone diving down toward our hidden chamber. It was a boy, maybe 9 years old, swimming down deeper than he should. His movements were already getting sluggish. He was running out of air, but he was too deep to surface in time. Without thinking, I swam toward him, but the water children were faster. They surrounded the drowning boy like a school of luminous fish, their small hands guiding him up toward the surface. I followed, watching as they helped him reach air in safety. When I surfaced, gasping and disoriented, the boy was already swimming back to shore where his panicked parents waited. He was telling them about the nice kids who'd helped him when he got scared underwater. I treaded water in the middle of the pool, my diving equipment weighing me down, and looked around for any sign of the 12 children. Nothing. Just normal water, normal sounds, normal sunlight breaking through the mist. But I could feel them there, watching from the depths, waiting for the next child who needed saving, waiting for me to understand what they really wanted. That night, Katie came to me in a dream that felt more real than waking. We sat together on the shore of the lake where she'd died, her small hand cold in mine. "You blame yourself," she said. "But it wasn't your fault, Daddy. Sometimes people just die, even children. I should have been watching closer. Should have seen the fishing line. Should have, could have, would have." She interrupted, using the phrase I'd taught her when she was worried about school tests. "The only thing that matters is what happens next." What do you want from me, baby girl? She squeezed my hand with fingers that felt like lake water. Help us save more. There are other places, other children in danger. We can't do it alone anymore. The water's changing, getting stronger. We need someone living to work with us. I don't understand. You will. But first you have to choose. You can join us forever, never feel sad again, never worry about losing anyone else. Or you can stay alive and help us from your side of the world. I woke up with tears on my face and the smell of lake water in my nostrils. Outside my motel window, dawn was breaking over the mountains, and I knew I had to go back to Blackwater Falls one more time. The emergency call came in at 7:23 a.m. A 6-year-old girl named Lily Garrett had gone missing during an early morning family hike to the falls. Her parents had been setting up breakfast while she played near the water's edge. When they looked up, she was gone. I arrived to find the family in hysterics and local search teams combing the area. The pool looked normal in the morning light, but I could feel the supernatural tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. She can't swim very well, her mother told me through tears. If she fell in, I suited up quickly, knowing that every minute counted. Drowning children can sometimes be revived after extended periods underwater, but only if you find them fast enough. I had maybe 10 minutes before brain damage became irreversible. 20 feet down, I found her. Lily was trapped in one of the smaller caves, her ankle caught between 2 rocks. She was unconscious, her small body floating limp in the still water. But she was surrounded by the 12 children, their pale forms creating a protective circle around her. She's been here too long, Katie said, her voice filling my head through the water. We've been giving her air, but we can't hold on much longer. I could see what she meant. The water children were flickering like dying candles, their forms becoming transparent with the effort of keeping Lily alive. Whatever power let them exist in these waters, it was being drained by their efforts to save her. Help me get her free, I said, swimming toward the trapped girl. Together, living father and dead daughter, we worked to free Lily from the rock crevice. The other children formed a chain, passing air bubbles from the surface down to us, creating impossible pockets of breathable atmosphere 25 feet underwater. When Lily's ankle came free, I grabbed her unconscious form and kicked toward the surface. But the water children didn't follow. They remained in their cave, their forms growing fainter and fainter. Daddy, Katie called as I swam away. This is goodbye. We don't have enough strength left. No! I wanted to turn back to stay with her, but Lily was dying in my arms. I had to choose between saving the living child and spending last moments with my dead daughter. I chose life. I broke the surface and swam hard for shore, performing rescue breathing as I moved. Lily's lips were blue, her small body cold as ice water. By the time I reached the rocky beach, she wasn't breathing at all. CPR on a child is different from CPR on an adult. Smaller chest, gentler compressions, more careful breathing. I worked on Lily for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, her parents crying nearby, the search team standing helplessly around us. Just when I thought I'd lost her, Lily coughed up lake water and started breathing on her own. Her eyes fluttered open, confused but alive. There were kids, she whispered. Nice kids who helped me breathe underwater. I looked back at the pool, hoping to see some sign of the 12 children who'd sacrificed their remaining energy to save her. The water was empty, still, reflecting only sky and clouds. But as the EMTs worked on Lily and her parents cried with relief, I heard it one last time. Children's laughter, faint but joyful, echoing across the water, and Katie's voice, barely a whisper. Thank you, Daddy. We can rest now. The water children of Blackwater Falls had found peace at last, their mission complete. They'd saved one more child, and that was enough. Lily Garrett, recovered completely. The doctors called it a miracle. 6 minutes underwater in a mountain pool should have left her with severe brain damage, but she showed no effects at all. She told everyone about the children who'd helped her breathe underwater, but doctors attributed it to near-death hallucinations. The local newspaper ran a story about the heroic ranger who'd saved a drowning child. They gave me a commendation and praised my innovative water rescue techniques. If only they knew the truth. I never saw the water children again after that day. The supernatural presence that had haunted Blackwater Falls for 30 years was gone. The unexplained currents returned to normal, the mysterious cold spots disappeared, and the children's laughter no longer echoed from empty water. But something had changed in me. During quiet moments at other water rescue sites, I sometimes catch glimpses of children who shouldn't be there. Pale figures watching from the depths of dangerous swimming holes, guardian spirits trying to prevent the next tragedy. I've started paying attention to those sightings, following up on near-drowning incidents where children report being helped by other kids. There are more places like Blackwater Falls than you might think, accident sites where young spirits linger, trying to save others from their fate. My job hasn't changed, but my understanding of it has. I still rely on science, training, and proper equipment to save lives. But now I also listen for whispers in the water, watch for movements that don't match the current, and trust my instincts when they tell me a place holds more than just H2O. Sometimes late at night, when I'm camping near a lake or river, I dream about Katie. We sit together by dark waters, and she tells me about the other children she's met, young spirits bound to the places where they died, all trying to prevent more tragedy. "We're still helping, Daddy," she says, "just differently now. The water remembers us, and sometimes that's enough." I don't know if those dreams are real visitations or just my mind, processing grief and hope. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I know she's at peace, that her death wasn't meaningless, that love can transcend even the deepest waters. 3 months ago, I started a new water safety program that combines traditional rescue techniques with respect for local folklore and spiritual beliefs. I teach parents to listen when children talk about imaginary friends near water, to take seriously the old stories about dangerous swimming holes, to understand that not all helpers in emergencies are visible to adult eyes. The program has been surprisingly successful. Drowning incidents are down 40% in my district, and other rangers are asking me to share my methods. I tell them it's about understanding that water has memory, that tragedy leaves echoes, and that sometimes the best way to prevent future deaths is to honor the past ones. My name is Thomas Brightwater, and I've spent 18 years keeping people alive around water. I still haven't lost anyone on my watch. The difference is, now I know I'm not working alone. In the quiet moments between emergencies, when mist rises from still water and sunlight slants through forest canopies, I sometimes hear them. Children's voices laughing in the distance, watching over the places where water runs deep and dangerous. The children of Blackwater Falls taught me that death isn't always the end of caring, that love can echo across years and dimensions, and that sometimes the best way to save the living is to remember the dead. They're still out there, in 1,000 hidden pools and forgotten swimming holes, pale guardians keeping watch over the water. And when the next child needs saving, they'll be ready, just like they always have been.